We drove cross country with the big TV in the back seat and the dog, a one-eyed mongrel dog. About a year, almost a year exactly, a little less than a year after we got to Hollywood, I met Roger Corman by accident. And we introduced, and he said, "You're a writer, aren't you? I read your stuff in Esquire." I said, "Oh, yeah, that's right. Would you like to write a movie?" "Yeah, I would like to write a movie."
Good evening, guys and ghouls, and welcome back to Monster Craze Memoirs, a generational podcast about B-movies. I am your host, Ian Garcia, and joining me, as always, is my father, Rocco.
Hello.
So, I know I said the last time we were on the air that, I know I said the last time we'd be coming back with an episode on Val Lewton's Ghost Ship. We did watch Ghost Ship for this week.
Really great picture.
I think I realized soon after the untimely passing of Peter Bogdanovich from complications due to Parkinson's disease on January 6th of last week, I sort of realized that we kind of had to rally together and do something comparable to what we did for
Monty Hellman. Monty Hellman.
We had to do something a little similar where we did a special episode, pay a little homage to Peter Bogdanovich. Now you may be asking yourself, Ian, why would Peter Bogdanovich, the director of The Last Picture Show,
Paper Moon,
mm-hmm. What's Up, Doc,
right.
The same guy who was immortalized for a new generation on The Sopranos and as a very good TV actor, why would we, on a show about old monster movies, why would we feel the need to comment upon the passing of a new Hollywood great?
That's a rhetorical question.
Great,
right?
like Peter. It is a very rhetorical question because just like with Monty Hellman, it's important to remember where a lot of the veterans of New Hollywood came from. And the fact of the matter is that at a time when there were only 3 film schools in the country, one on the East Coast,
I didn't know that.
2 on the West Coast. Actually, I think, no, definitely at the time that he was coming up, there would have only been 2 film schools. And I don't even believe he went to film school. But at a time when there were only 3 film schools in the country, and at a time where nobody was hiring people out of film school, the primary way, if you were a sort of young, despondent film brat, a guy who just loved movies and wanted to make movies, but nobody would give you the opportunity to do movies, the only way to do it was more or less to come up through the exploitation circuit. And so, just like with Monty Hellman, Peter Bogdanovich is a guy who, the difference is that, Monty Hellman sort of had a kind of didn't really have a tremendous career before he became associated with Roger Corman, before he sort of went through the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking, working with his company Film Group to make movies like The Beast from Haunted Cave, gradually working with other producers. Eventually he works with Corman again to make those wonderful westerns, The Shooting and Ride in the Whirlwind, before going independent completely with Two Lane Blacktop. Peter Bogdanovich actually had a much more substantial professional life. He was kind of a boy wonder in his own way. Much more, among all of the new Hollywood filmmakers, I think Peter Bogdanovich was probably much more in the mold of a previous generation of movie upstarts. These guys that we sort of call the boy wonders when I'm thinking of as like guys like people who in the 30s and 40s, like Irving Thalberg, Darryl F. Zanuck, David O. Selznick, these really young guys who at a time when the film industry was kind of in a period of contraction due to the pressures of the economy during the Great Depression, sort of started the first sort of wave of these very prestigious movies, sort of the reorganization of Hollywood film culture in order to really treat filmmaking more like a art form than just a commodity. I think someone like Peter Bogdanovich, I think you can distinguish him from people like Monty Hellman or like Martin Scorsese or like Robert Altman or, any number of these filmmakers. I think that, while they might have had very similar influences, I think Peter Bogdanovich always sort of had a kind of older Hollywood mode about him, and I think that comes out definitely in the later pictures he made after his sort of high point in the late 60s and 70s when he was part of that new Hollywood movement. I think you see reflected in his later works more of a kind of classical, a less formalist bent as a filmmaker, and I think that's something that does come out of his earlier movies in the new Hollywood. He is less of a formalist. He's not so there's not the same degree either of a kind of experimentalism. Like, his films are experimental, but there's this way, like, say something like The Last Picture Show. I think, The Last Picture Show is a very kind of dry and arid and kind of sociological movie, but when you really pin it down, it really is kind of more of an evolution of the sort of social problem or youth movies, these movies about kind of wayward, delinquent youth.
Right.
And there's
being left behind.
Yeah,
right. Dying towns.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. There's just something a bit more classical in Peter Bogdanovich's bent, and so I think it's sort of reflective of the fact that, unlike a lot of the movie brats, the people who were coming out of film school, Peter Bogdanovich was a guy who, at a very young age, he completely skipped college. He went straight to the Stella Adler Conservatory. He started out as an actor. He was also a director for the stage. He was also a very prodigious writer. He became a programmer of films for the Museum of Modern Art and the New Yorker Theater. He published numerous books, and the most significant being on Howard Hawks, Orson Welles, and Alfred Hitchcock. Right. He was really more of a film scholar and a writer before
I think they said, the Welles book, they say, I believe, was the most close to Welles that you can get. Of all the ones that were done.
Well, he was a very prodigious writer, but he was also was very good at getting primary evidence, at like interviewing the people he was talking about. And of course, by talking to Orson Welles, he actually developed a very close friendship with Welles. And obviously, Orson Welles is a director he very firmly idolized. But yeah, he wrote film criticism and articles on film for Esquire, the Saturday Evening Post. He was also one of the few American authors to be published in Cahiers du Cinéma, which is the famous French magazine out of which so much of the French New Wave emerged. So by the mid-60s, he becomes determined to not just write about film. He wants to just break into making movies. So in the mid-60s, he moves out to Los Angeles. He's unemployed. Nobody will hire him. And eventually, he meets a guy named Roger Corman. Now, Roger Corman recognizes Bogdanovich because, this is part of the thing, is that Roger Corman, despite his reputation as a huckster of exploitation movies, which is absolutely what he was a shrewd but also penny-pinching and calculating person. And I think it's fair to say that even the best Roger Corman movies are consistently undermined by the conflict that he clearly has between his clear love of cinema and his clear investment in trying to make movies that are meaningful. And despite the pulpy genres in which he's working, to try to use pulp to explore certain moral or philosophical questions, there's always that balance on the other end where he's just, Roger Corman is a guy who's his own worst enemy. So we don't often realize that Roger Corman himself as a producer was a terribly well invested and literate connoisseur of cinema and very well read in terms of cinema. So when he meets a guy named Peter Bogdanovich, of course he's going to recognize Bogdanovich's name. He will say, "Oh, I love what you've written about Orson Welles. I love this book. I recognize you as an intelligent person." And so there's that weird way in which, like, it doesn't seem... because of how much Peter Bogdanovich is built up in the imaginary of New Hollywood, but Roger Corman is forgotten, it doesn't seem like this would be the gestation for a professional and a creative relationship that would ultimately lead to, in the same case as Monty Hellman, a kind of flowering of this real artistic genius at a time where, you know, the major studios are floundering. They don't really know how to recapture the marketplace in terms of getting people to get out of their living rooms, stop looking at their televisions, and come back to the movies. You know, people like Roger Corman, and especially Roger Corman, of all of the exploitation filmmakers, were really instrumental for giving a lot of people who wanted to be filmmakers but who had no experience in the industry, and more importantly were not patient to do what previous people in the industry had done, which is that you would just go into some random technical position and you would slowly work your way up over the course of possibly decades. Someone like...
But it's not a journalism where you start off as a copy boy and become a reporter.
Well,
like Bernstein.
Well,
right?
no,
back then they used to do that, right?
Right, but that's the thing. Yeah, in the days of the classic studio system, that was absolutely how it worked. That was absolutely how it worked. That you could be like literally just like a errand boy in the cutting department of a studio, and as long as you were diligent enough, and as long as you put your foot in the door somewhere, you might move up to a projectionist in the editing department. Then suddenly you're becoming an assistant in the editing department, then suddenly you're becoming an editor. You know, that's how things worked back then. But I think what's going on in the 60s more than anything is that, well, number one, the studio system by this point is completely and utterly collapsing. The power in the industry is increasingly going away from the movie studios themselves, because obviously in 1948, the major film companies have been divested of their distribution arms. They can now only produce the movies. They can distribute and they can produce movies. They can't exhibit them. They've lost their theater chain.
So you lost their theater chain, right?
So that's one hit. Obviously, television is another hit. People are just not coming back to the movies as much as they used to, and there's really no hope of reclaiming the same numbers as you had before television because, you know, I think it's also the war had something to do with it. I think there was like a whole generation that, because of the very robust social democratic policies of the Roosevelt and of the Truman administration, were feeling much more comfortable, a lot more stable, and as a result, you know, after all of the experiences of the Depression and the war, we're maybe a little more sanguine, a little more content to just stay in the home on a weekend, on a weeknight, and just watch the television rather than...
No escapism, right? Or whatever.
Right. Rather than round up all the fucking kids and put them in the car and take them to the movies and buy the popcorn. It's like, screw it, we can make the popcorn at home.
Right. Watch TV. We could watch what's on TV.
Yeah. So there's that element to it, but also what's happened in the course of this time is that basically now the studio contract system has completely fallen apart, because while it's still possible to be a technician under contract at a studio, increasingly stars themselves are no longer getting into contracts with the major studios. Rather, they are being represented by talent agencies who in turn, and the talent agencies themselves are becoming even more influential in terms of the development of films. They package the actors, they even package the directors sometimes, and they say, this is the type of movie so-and-so wants to make, so if you want the bankable star, you have to pay this much and you have to produce this movie. Right. So what ends up happening is that over the course of the 50s and the 60s is basically more or less all of the major studios start to get swallowed up by conglomerates, many of whom are not, their motive is not in film. A lot of them are industrial conglomerates or pharmaceutical conglomerates, sometimes even food companies. So really, the film studios themselves and film production has become a part of the diversification of financial assets rather than about the making of the movies themselves. And as a result, you have an industry that is a lot more unstable. The profits are a lot less reliable, and there also are less jobs to be had in that industry. So now, despite the fact that now that the academy is just starting, now that colleges in America are just starting to recognize the artistry of film, now that they're teaching classes in film studies, now that they're teaching people like Alfred Hitchcock like they are masters of an art form and not just entertainers. And now that you have people going to college and to graduate school to learn how to be filmmakers, they're going into this situation at precisely the point where the studios are no longer hiring. So what do? Where do you go? Well, in most people's cases, you try the independent low-budget film circuit, which more often than not means you're going to be doing some exploitation movies. Peter Bogdanovich meeting Roger Corman really is pretty much the best thing that could happen to him, because in the days before the valuation of films as an art form, someone like Peter Bogdanovich, again, they would probably have to serve a lot of time in some menial technical position before they would have been allowed to be behind the camera. In this case, Roger Corman meets Peter Bogdanovich, and just like Monty Hellman or Francis Ford Coppola, he's immediately throwing them into the deep end and offering them these, basically offering them the positions of personal assistant. Now, what does a personal assistant to Roger Corman look like? Well, in Bogdanovich's case, it means that his first significant film credit comes on an assignment for one of Roger Corman's most famous movies, which is a great movie starring Peter Fonda. It's a little biker film called The Wild Angels.
They're wild and no angels, law-defying, getting their kicks from violence and torture. The Wild Angels, starring Peter Fonda and Nancy Sinatra.
And Peter Bogdanovich is Corman's personal assistant on the production, which means that in addition to being an assistant to the director, he's also doing uncredited cinematography, uncredited editing. He does uncredited...
Cuts his teeth on the process,
And not only that, he does an uncredited revision of the original screenplay by Charles B. Griffith. So he's getting writing experience, he's getting all this technical experience, and Corman even promotes him with no pay raise He promotes him to being director of the film's second unit for 3 more weeks of shooting. Right. So literally, just by this association with Corman, Bogdanovich finds a guy who is giving him this massive opportunity and really helping him in a very short amount of time. In his words, it was basically the span of 21 weeks. He's learning basically everything there is to know about the rudiments of filmmaking. Never had to spend a minute in college, never had to go to a major studio. Yeah. So Corman gets sufficiently impressed by Bogdanovich's very quick adaptation to the kind of workflow that he has. And so Corman does what he does every time he's impressed by what a production assistant is able to do on one of his rinky-dink, little sailboats. He commissions him to slap together a film to capitalize on a potential deal or just take advantage of some money he's got sitting around on the floor from a previous production, because that's how much of a frugal filmmaker he was. So what we're going to be talking about on this special episode are 2 films that Peter Bogdanovich was involved in, both of them intimately related to his time with Roger Corman before he was able to make The Last Picture Show. The first of them that we're going to talk about is not the first one he made. This is the one that he's assigned to do in the middle of the time between the first film that Corman gave him to sort of, again, make a film out of some money that he had lying around on the floor, and that film actually getting picked up by a major distributor and really breaking Peter Bogdanovich into a position where he becomes more critically known, not just as an author and not just as an actor of the stage, but as a legitimate filmmaker and a guy who's part of this growing movement of younger directors making very different kinds of films that are far more rooted in a kind of artistic understanding of film than the kind of homogenized production line and packaging that they had become over the 50s and the 60s. And so the first one we're going to talk about is called Voyage to the Planet of the Prehistoric Women.
Here's the Russian pickup Roger had, right?
Russian pickup on which my assignment was to put some girls on the planet of Mars, Venus.
So you took Mamie Van Doren and some babes
Mamie
out to the
Van
beach.
Doren and a few blondes, and we shot down on Leo Carrillo Beach, which Roger said would be a great match for the Black Sea. Oh, God.
Venus. Venus. A planet named after the goddess of love. This is where I left her. 26 million miles away. Because I know she exists. I know she does. I know it. All the time we were there, I heard her. Her and that sweet, haunting sound she makes, like the sirens that tempted Ulysses.
Now, I was, kind of distressed when we were watching Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women, because I slowly realized that you had not recognized that we have technically seen this movie
I knew.
before.
I said we've seen this before. We saw parts of it, but I never saw.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
I guess I just thought that the film, when
Was
we had
the
seen it
Island
before,
of
it was
Planet of Storms, right?
Planet of Storms.
Right.
Yeah.
You showed me that. Oh, I don't think we reviewed that.
No, we did. It was
We
back
did.
in season 2.
That's
and
right.
this is the thing. It's
Right,
like I thought it
right.
would have had a bigger impression on you.
It did because
yeah.
I thought I liked it. Because
Yeah.
it told the story, and I think. Go ahead, you continue. I don't want to interrupt.
like that's the thing is that so basically, in season 2 we did a very special episode where we covered some science fiction and
Right,
fantasy
that's
movies
it.
from the Eastern Bloc. One of them was Planet of Storms, this Soviet
That's out of Russia. Right?
space movie, and the other was a Journey to the Center of Time, which was that wonderful
Yeah.
I think it was a Ukrainian film about like these
kids that
these
go on
kids
a
that
boat.
go on a river
Right.
and they transports them back in time.
Right. That was pretty good too.
Yeah, that was
Yep,
great
yep.
too. Planet of Storms is this 1962 Russian film that's made by this pioneering special effects filmmaker named Pavel Kloshantsev. And basically, we had covered, it was a patron exclusive episode that we did it. It was episode 21. See, Corman this is another thing that is not told a lot about Corman, is that he's a big fan of Russian movies. Like, one of his favorite films of all time is Battleship Potemkin. So sometime in between 1962 and 1964, Roger Corman acquires the U.S. distribution rights to Planeta Bur, which is the Russian title for Planet of Storms. He also acquires the rights to another Soviet sci-fi film, a previous space race film called Nebo Zovyat, or The Sky Beckons, which was made in 1959. Corman hires Francis Ford Coppola, then not known for anything. He hasn't even made Dementia 13 yet, which is the movie that is this sort of, this is the beginning. That's his first official directorial effort. He gives the movie to Francis Ford Coppola, who he makes an associate producer, and basically Coppola oversees the dubbing and re-editing of Nebo Zovyat, as well as the direction and shooting of additional sequences that result in a movie called Battle Beyond the Sun. It receives a limited theatrical release and then is directly sold to television. Corman then gives Planet of Storms to Curtis Harrington. Previously, I think it was season 1,
Curtis Harrington.
In season 1, me and Eli did an episode on Night Tide starring Dennis Hopper. That was directed by Curtis Harrington, and that's, and funded by Roger Corman as well. He gives Curtis Harrington basically the same job for Planeta Bur, and Curtis Harrington re-edits and oversees the dubbing of the movie, and that gets released as Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet in the summer of 1965. So the story that Bogdanovich tells is that Roger Corman wants to sell his re-edited version of Planet of Storms to American International Pictures Television, but they won't pick it up because it doesn't have any women in it. Now, I think this is unlikely because, as I had said before, these movies were already sold to television immediately upon their being completed. AIP definitely already purchased and syndicated Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women. Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet. I'm already getting mixed up. I think what's more likely is that Corman was just trying to juice another film out of previously existing materials, because the thing is that at this point he's thinking of liquidating his film group company. The Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women is the last movie that film group produces, so Bogdanovich also has that honor of being the director of the last film group movie, and it's basically he has one more contractual obligation to deliver a movie to AIP, so he's just like, all right, I'll just throw this shit together and then I'll be done with it. So really what Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women is it's not just Curtis Harrington's dub and re-edit of Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet. It also combines it with elements from the dubbing of Battle Beyond the Sun. Those scenes in the opening of the film. The movie opens with this kind of really canned, like, narrative opening showing all of these space technologies.
Yeah, it's about 10 minutes.
Yeah, this 10-minute opening in which we're told all about the marvels of space technology and how this is, right, and how basically, the typical thing, the story you're about to see may seem fantastic, but it might not be so fantastic in the very near future.
If you see the thing that we're showing you first.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. If you see the thing we're showing you first, and if you don't fall asleep before the movie starts. And that all, including the part that comes after it where you see the launch of a rocket into space, all of that comes from The Sky Beckons, which in turn was edited into Battle Beyond the Sun.
I see.
So that comes from that. And so the movie that we have here is kind of a composite of those two films, mostly Planet of Storms, right, or Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet, plus at least 10 minutes of new material that Peter Bogdanovich shot exclusively for this version of the film.
Right.
So I basically what I'm saying is that, like, it's easy to see why this isn't typically acknowledged as a Peter Bogdanovich movie, or at least not his first official movie, because technically I guess you could say it's a Peter Bogdanovich et al. Movie, because there was one because you basically have to count the director of Planet of Storms, the two directors on The Sky Beckons, Francis Ford Coppola, Curtis Harrington, and Peter Bogdanovich. So technically this is a movie with 6 directors.
And it shows.
It does show. It's like, it's like, look,
but he puts his mark on it, doesn't he? I mean,
well, that's the thing.
Yeah, he puts a mark on it.
I know really. You haven't seen the previous edit, Curtis Harrington's version, no. Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet. No. I have. I am now in the enviable position of having seen all 3 versions of this one movie. And I have to say that despite the fact that Bogdanovich, he ended up taking a pseudonym, Derek Thomas. He says it's because, well, I only did 10 minutes of new stuff. It's basically not my movie. I think he just didn't want his professional name associated with the product, which I don't blame you. Go ahead, do what you need to do. But I have to say, whereas Curtis Harrington's version really, obviously Curtis Harrington actually did direct new stuff for Voyage, the Planet of Prehistoric Women, because recap of Planet of Storms, it's about 3 spaceships that are launched to explore the planet Venus. One is destroyed before it reaches the planet. Another, containing a scientist, his assistant, and a robot he's built, descends upon the planet. They lose contact with them, and so the last ship sends its 3 cosmonauts down to recover them, and there's a woman on the ship who's basically locked in the position where if she doesn't get into contact with them in a certain amount of time, she has to leave.
Right.
And so they go down to the planet Venus. Everybody's exploring it, and and basically what Curtis Harrington does is, at Corman's request, is they very strategically replace the scenes in the Soviet film of the woman in the spaceship who is her name is changed to Marcia in Voyage to the Prehistoric Planet. They keep referring to Marcia in Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women, but now there's no frame of reference to who Marcia is.
Right.
So you'd be completely lost.
Right.
You might. It's interesting. For a second, I was like, wait, is Marcia the computer?
That's what I thought.
Is that the mothership? What are they?
That's
talking about?
That's what I was thinking. Marcia is the mothership. Yeah.
All I hear all day long at school is how great Marcia is at this, or how wonderful Marcia did that. Marcia.
The point being is that what Curtis Harrington did is that and Roger Corman did, they just replaced the stuff of Marcia with an American actress and Basil Rathbone basically playing in this control station where they're talking to and trying to get into contact with the Russian people in the other side of the movie. It's very much a straightforward dubbing of and abridgment of Planet of Storms.
Right. But it loses its flavor.
Yes.
I mean, obviously.
Well, it certainly loses its pacing.
Right. It also loses the interaction of the young character with the Marcia who's on the ship.
Right.
Her love for.
It loses its melodramatic
right.
kind of credibility. That's the thing that was great about watching Planet of Storms.
No, it was good. I liked it.
I think the first, one of the things that I said about Planet of Storms was that what's great about it is that it's kind of boring, but in a good way. It's enjoyable because it's so lacking in any pretense. Yeah. And you have to remember, this movie is being made in 1962, and for the time, the special effects on this movie are absolutely amazing. It is more or less 2001 before 2001. It is a movie about a group of cosmonauts who are going on this hazardous expedition. There's a sort of, it's not as developed as it is in 2001, but the robot John in the movie, there's this sort of intimation that there's this part near the climax where robot John needs to carry the cosmonauts across a river of lava, but then when he finds the cosmonauts are too heavy, his life preservation controls take over and he's about to destroy them. So they disconnect John and they leave him to die, so to speak, in the lava. And the scientist who made him is really torn up about it because you start to see that he actually respects John as a being. And it's this, there's this weird Soviet energy to it. Was John our comrade?
Well, he was also the other thing about what is it, Planet of Storms, is that that guy was the philosophical guy. So every time they stopped, he had something to say.
Well, the scientist is not the philosophical guy. The philosophical guy is the captain of the rescue team. He's the one who's because there's 3 characters on the rescue team. One is the captain. One is the youngest of the 3 of them, who basically they keep hearing this weird sound echoing across the planet, and the youngest one is sure that it's the voice of a woman.
Right.
And so there's that guy, and then there's the other guy who is basically constantly poo-pooing. He's there's no possible way intelligent life could exist on Venus. And in between them, the captain is kind of being the guy who's no, it is possible, and we need to keep we need to be realistic, but we also need to be optimistic. That's the whole philosophical tenor of the movie.
But he does a lot. Periodically, whenever they stop on the island, he talks. He does something about life.
Well,
about
anytime there.
yeah.
But that's the thing
It's
about
like Socrates going to the planet with Socrates.
Right, but exactly. But that's the thing about Planet of Storms is that it's not an action or an adventure movie. It's a speculative work of fiction in which, at every possible point, the characters engage in a didactic theorizing that must have been appreciated by the Soviet bureaucracy, who were of course all fans of everything didactic and regimented. But it's a great little movie, and of course there's that whole mysterious kind of ambiguity about it, because it's this thing where every time they hear the voice of the women, something bad happens to them. Either they cross a river, or they cross a lake and they're attacked by a pterodactyl, or a volcano erupts, or suddenly an earthquake happens and the sky just begins this torrential flooding rain. And so one of the interesting ambiguities about the movie is that once it's finally revealed, because the young man, he collects a rock, they find the ruins of an old Venusian civilization, and the fact that they have a sculpture to the pterodactyl, so it suggests that they even worshipped those as their gods. And he discovers a rock in the ruins that is just sort of oddly shaped, but then later on he realizes that inside the rock is a
like a
representation of the Venusians,
an amulet or something,
and they're humanoid. And so he's like, at the great climax of the movie is this young man, just as they're all about to take off in the ship, he's just screaming, "They look like us! They look like us!" Because he's so excited, because basically, like, it's intelligent life, and they're basically a reflection of us. They all just take off, and then of course in the pool of water we see the mysterious reflection
really well done.
It's a nice way to go out, and it hits home with this ambiguity, because you're wondering, so were the Venusians trying to kill the astronauts, or is it every time we hear their voice they're trying to warn them about potential danger? They're trying to get them to avoid dying. They're too afraid to reveal themselves, but they're trying to save their lives. And it's a wonderful little element of the story that, notably, and I think that's the thing.
Well, Peter Bogdanovich, his cuts actually show they're trying to kill them.
Right. But that's the thing, and the reason
it wrecks the whole. It doesn't wreck the film.
I'm sorry that it was necessary to go into a re-synopsis of Planet of Storms and its themes, because I think that underpins why it is that with Curtis Harrington's version, you don't really get a lot out of it. And it is basically just a bastardized version of the original film. It's less speculative. It comes off as more hokey. It's not slowly paced enough. It's just it's a movie that was cobbled together to be shown on television.
It seems cobbled. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the difference, and I think it speaks volumes about Peter Bogdanovich, even if he's modest about what he did with it, it speaks volumes that what he decides to include in his version of the film is not only actually responding to elements of the plot of the original film, it is also responding to the themes of the film. It's responding to themes of, like, the idea of what would happen to human beings if they went to a planet not knowing if there was intelligent life, and then the indigenous life is there. How would it respond to us? And also he also even manages to pick up the plot thread of Robot John and, like, the role of the robot in the story. It's really quite fascinating, because obviously, it's fascinating, but it's kind of dumb.
Well, you have to remember that, the beings speak like telepathy, just like to serve man in the Twilight Zone episode. They speak telepathically, so it's very interesting. But maybe that's good, because none of them probably could act well.
Basically all Bogdanovich did was he went to Lea Carrillo Beach. He hired a bunch of beautiful.
Mamie Van Doren?
Mamie Van Doren is playing the leader of the Venusians. We don't
Right.
see them in the original Planet of Storms, except in the reflection at the very end.
Right.
Here we see them from the jump. They're woken up by the arrival of the space people, and obviously Leo Carrillo Beach looks absolutely nothing like a Black Sea coast.
Yeah, there's a mismatch between the filming,
there's
color
no continuity at all. And basically it follows through, and obviously, like you said right off the bat, is that now there's no ambiguity. It's made explicit that they are trying to use their powers to kill the invading humans, and it's made explicit. And that's the thing, even to the extent that they're doing that, Bogdanovich does something, and this is the thing. I don't know. It really is amazing, because he could not have had very much money to do this. And yet what he manages to do is, obviously, so the pterodactyl thing attacks the boat. They shoot at it. And in the original movie, I think the bird thing gets away.
Yeah.
In this version, it dies, and it sort of washes up on the rocks of the Venusians. Right. And so just to do that, they have to make a replica of this pterodactyl, which is just this. I mean, it looks awful because it's just this.
It's not that awful.
It looks like it's bones. It looks like it looks like it looks like a Looney Tunes cartoon after a steamroller goes over it. It looks like it's boneless, but but it does look remarkably.
It's boneless chicken.
Yeah, it is. It's a rubber chicken. It's a giant rubber chicken. They worship. This is a.
But there's something.
This is the cult of Groucho Marx.
But there's something symbolic about it. I think Peter. One of the amazing. I think good. We talking about.
No, you go ahead.
But the idea is that one of the things that I found somewhat poignant was the fact that when they see the spaceship take off, they realize that the pterodactyl,
that their god.
Their god Terra is not
the
all powerful, and so they pick up the ruins of John, and they make him his molten body as the new god.
And that's the part where it's really
cool.
Something.
Yeah,
and
that's pretty smart to do. Really, it was a smart.
Well, it's not just smart, because I'm trying to boggle my mind of how they did it, because I'm trying to because
because they have to make that.
Right. It's how did he get them to... Because I can understand making costumes that look more or less like the... Because when we see at the end of the movie, we see the shell-like depiction of the Venusian. We see the hat it wears. So, of course, when they're putting Mamie Van Doren in her costume, it looks like how what is implied in the original movie. With something like the pterodactyl, while it doesn't look exactly like the pterodactyl,
no, it's pretty close.
It looks really close to what it looked like. And so I'm wondering if they got
the entire budget.
If they got it secondhand from another production, or if they had it made themselves. I'm leaning towards secondhand. But it does look so much like the original one that
even the tail.
That it suggests that they specifically produced it for these sequences.
Maybe they got it from the actual people that had it.
See, that would not be unheard of, because in Godzilla Raids Again, right? The second Godzilla movie, when the American distribution rights were sold to an American distributor, it was going to be retitled Gigantus the Fire Monster. What happened in that arrangement was that not only were they given the distribution rights to the film, but because Toho knew that they were going to be basically filming new scenes with American actors, Toho even made, as part of the deal, made for them 2 new monster suits so that they could film new action scenes. Nothing ended up coming of it. Apparently some stuff was shot, but all of that footage is lost, and also those 2 costumes are lost. No one knows what happened to them. It's possible that Corman might have gotten something from the production of the film as part of the deal, but the thing that just makes it unlikely to me is just, number one, the time difference, because and it's also circumstantial stuff. I had gone into this on the Planet of Storms episode, Planet of Storms was released in 1962, and despite the fact that it was one of the most popular Soviet films within the USSR of the time, basically because of a bunch of like party bureaucracy and cliquishness, basically the movie is just written off. You know, the director, Khrushchev, becomes persona non grata literally overnight. It's a really sad story. So I don't see the likelihood of them holding on to any of these materials with any diligence. And it doesn't look like the prop that they're using in Corman's version.
Right. It looks more rubberized.
Is something that was in the original production, which then only, as you mentioned before, it only begs the question about Robot John. Because again, in the original movie, Robot John falls into the lava. He's brought down a river. And Bogdanovich, quite brilliantly, as the characters, the Venusians, they find Robot John's sort of rusted, melted body. And they're so proud because, yes, our god this is one of their demons. This is one of their creatures. And this is a message from our god that he's destroyed them. But then, as you say, when the humans get away, they reject their old god and they take John and they start worshiping him as their god.
Right.
That and that was the thing that I like, and that's where you realize, like, you start to respect the facility of low budget filmmakers and prop people, because the thing that I realized was it looks enough like the robot from the original movie. But I realized, that's just two oil drums that's been welded together and like
you really can't. It's not. I mean, you see the corrugated arms, rusted.
Right.
Whatever they Rust-Oleum, whatever they put on it for the effect.
Right, but it clearly doesn't have the same complicated segmented parts as the original robot.
Because it's supposed to be destroyed, right? It's supposed to be melted partially.
Well, it's also only supposed to be shown really quickly.
Right.
You know, it's like, but that's the thing is that it looks enough like it that you start to realize that, like,
it fits right in the film just perfectly.
These guys really paid attention to what they were doing. What becomes this thing where it's like, it sort of seems to suggest that, like, unlike Curtis Harrington, it seems like Bogdanovich was like really respecting of the original film and in some sense like trying to expand upon it but preserve, like,
who did the rewrite did Bogdanovich do the rewrite?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so he did the rewrite, so he realized he needed two set pieces to fit into that. He wrote the screenplay to fit in to accomplish that. I believe that he said, well, we're going to need this because this is my theme. And, of course, like you said, he's under Corman, right? So stingy budget, right?
Right.
But he managed to do it. I mean, I wish there was more of a history. He's not alive now. You could have written him.
Well, it's just...
But, that would be good to know who worked with him. Maybe that kind of question can be pursued.
Yeah, this is just the sort of question that people like Roger Corman and Peter Bogdanovich are never asked in their entire careers because nobody gives a shit about these movies. And it's upsetting because now I'm looking at it and I'm being like, they really did a bang-up job.
Yep.
The results are, by definition, stupid.
Right.
The results are by definition ruins the movie.
It ruins the movie in terms of the original movie and its symbolic nature. Correct.
But as a kind of like pulpy, weird tales twist on this
a bag of popcorn, it works.
Yeah, that was like it's a surprise.
It is, yeah,
because both.
Well, you're ready to turn it off. So no, let me watch.
Well,
this.
I was ready to turn it off in the opening 10 minutes where it was just a documentary that I ended up having to find out that Francis Ford Coppola shot 2 years ago. You know, it wasn't even what Bogdanovich had done.
Right.
I'm prepared to say what Coppola did for The Sky Beckons. Yeah, I'm prepared to say that was crap. But what Bogdanovich actually contributed to this movie, I mean, besides the fact that he just made new narration for the whole thing of it. and he's doing the narration himself. But like you see, like he's exercising
creativity.
Right, exactly. He's not just producing the project in an associate capacity to Corman. He's authorizing it.
Right.
He's putting his stamp,
on it. Right.
For reasons that once you really comes down to it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but like, and then it also makes me give credit to Corman, because if he has to have these 2 new props whipped up, I don't care if each of them only cost like $100.
No, it costs.
He has to be going to Roger Corman and say, oh, by the way, can I get like a couple $100 to make these new props that look like what's in the movie? I think it's to Corman's credit that he trusts Bogdanovich enough to say, yeah, that's a worthy expense. I'm just going to sell this to TV anyway, just because I want to liquidate my company.
Right.
I'm done with it. But yeah, you go ahead and do what you think you need to do.
Yeah, I saw overall. I'm glad I saw it. Like I said, I really enjoyed your Russian version because of its philosophical.
Yeah.
The discussion between the cosmonauts. All along, even in the interactions with the people on the other ships, et cetera, Marcia, that whole concept is destroyed in this movie. But like I said, it's interesting how he wove it in, and like you said, it doesn't fit well, but to his credit.
I think the thing about Planet of Storms is that it's interesting watching it in the context of contemporary American films, because there were obviously more speculative American space travel movies, but it really is something altogether to see a optimistic. I mean, it's part of the forced optimism of socialist realism. It's a propaganda film at the end of the day.
All of them are.
But there's something to be said about not only the forced optimism, but the idea that there's no enemy in the movie. It really is just, it's an adventure of the mind and encouraging the viewer. Look, all these things are possible just because of the capacity of human beings to think and to imagine, which is probably why Kuznetsov eventually became a persona non grata, because you can't get too imaginative in the Soviet Union or else you start thinking subversive things, but at the same time, and again, the ambiguity about the Venusians, is this a sort of representation of like a kind of ambiguous but ultimately sympathetic alien people, because they might be fighting back against the astronauts. And that's another interesting question, because so in the original movie, there's almost consistent with kind of communist propaganda of the time. There's this endemic kind of anti-imperialist bent to it, where there's a distinct possibility that the indigenous peoples of Venus are attacking these Soviet cosmonauts, but none of the characters who believe that they are there take it personally. None of them thinks that this is a reason to declare war. Nobody is interested in conquering Venus. They just want to explore the planet and learn about the people there and share our knowledge. In Bogdanovich's American revision of the film, not only is it more explicit that the Venusians are violent, but it's also more explicit that they're primitive. In the original film, there's this part where they see the volcano erupting, and one of the characters is like, look at the lights behind the mountain. Those seem like they're artificial. It seems like there must be some kind of city behind it. We don't ever see a Venusian city, but again, it's part of the ambiguity of the story, leaving something open. In Bogdanovich's film, it's very clear that these are like primitive people.
I think they're primitive. They're just more violent, isn't it right? So they speak to each other telepathically.
Right.
They can't be that stupid, but they do eat fish.
But it's like like Atlantis imagery, because they're sunken city. So they haven't necessarily. There's basically this allusion to the idea that they were once this proud empire. Right. They were destroyed by the sort of natural disaster, and now what's left of them, they have the ability to communicate by telepathy, but they're still worshiping like sky dragons and stuff like that, and the volcano itself.
Right.
And then what happens once they realize that, like, there's this. again, and they're all women, so there's this weird like gender
Yeah,
thing going
but
on where
there are other films like that, right?
well, yeah, there are other films like that, but I'm saying like this is sort of like
Where they're all women.
It's
right.
like it's reflecting the ideological distinction because from Bogdanovich's American perspective, suddenly this story becomes about these indigenous people, these indigenous women seeing these amazing male cosmonauts with their big phallic rocket and their big strong robot and who survive literally just by doing nothing.
Right,
They
just
do
fly
nothing
away.
and they completely survive. And then what do? They throw away their old god and they worship the human god.
Right.
So it's like there's this almost like in the same way that there's a kind of anti-imperialist message to the original film Planet of Storms, Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women almost is subliminal. It's like in reflective of an almost colonialist mentality, like the sort of natural superiority of the male now Americanized astronauts versus these primitive women
Right.
who worship sky dragons.
So you get like an American overlay on a Russian film.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
To give the projection of how Americans would view it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
maybe I don't know if that probably was part of the make it more palatable, right?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
they did a lot of things to make it palatable. I mean, as with any, like, Corman did a lot of these things where he purchased, like, movies from the Eastern Bloc, and then he had them dubbed and re-edited. And, of course, to dub and re-edit them, he had to hide the fact that they were made in the Eastern Bloc, because otherwise nobody would go to see them. So, in addition to changing the title and dubbing the movies, they also disguised their Soviet origins by having all the Russian cast and crew either go uncredited or giving them completely invented names. So the actor Gennady Vernov becomes Aldo Romani. Georgy Tek becomes James David. That's just two first names. That's just cheating. Vladimir Yemelyanov becomes Roberto Martelli. Yuri Sarentsev becomes Ralph Phillips, and Georgy Zhizyanov becomes Murray Gerard.
You have the rights. You could do that. Means total rights.
and I'm really wondering about like a lot of these other casting credits. So basically, the cinematographer Fleming Olsen and editor Bob Collins, they seem to be real individuals because each one of them has a short list of credits, but none of them are projects for Bogdanovich or AIP or Corman. I can't say the same for a lot of the other people involved because they're either fake names or literally Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women is the only movie they worked on. There's Vittorio Ferroni. It seems like there's a relationship between Italian names in the credits and them not being real people. So that's supposed to be the art director. It's like the art director of what? There's no original art direction in the Bogdanovich parts. The costume designer, Alice Mitchell, I don't think it took a lot of designing for what they were putting. Mamie Van Doren and all those women.
Siren suits. Right?
Like basically they have like a restaurant napkins on their heads. Like it's really not and it was only one of them has a crown. And composer Keith Benjamin, I think it's all library music. The makeup artists are Mary Jo Weir and Vergie, and the sound editor is a guy named Bert Campbell. I do know that the production manager, Giles de Turenne, is genuine. He would either go on, he was actually Bogdanovich's assistant director on the next of his Corman-related movies that he did, which was going to be his first official movie. And I did manage to, I think I know who is responsible for the amazing props in this movie. Credited for special props is a guy named Hua Chang, and it turns out Hua Chang is a guy who has credits in props and special effects going all the way back to the 1940s. So I'm thinking Bogdanovich or Corman did a good job making good on some like connections they had and said to this old timer, prop guy, hey, could you really quickly whip us up some a pterodactyl and a giant robot prop? And so he said sure,
based on these images.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so look, it's like it's and obviously the producer Norman D. Wells is not a real person. Corman is not credited on the project. My idea is that Norman D. Wells is probably a inside joke and an homage. I think it's supposed to be an allusion to H.G. Wells, Norman D. Wells, and also, of course, his idol Orson Welles. So it's an inside joke. So, we've already gone into about an hour, so I'm thinking I'm gonna do this as a free episode. I'm thinking we could come back next week to do targets. Do you think that would be a good idea?
But then we'll be too far out to do.
I mean, we were doing Monty Hellman for a whole month. I think we can reserve a little bit of time for Peter Bogdanovich.
Okay, so the next one we'll do is do the.
We'll do targets. Yeah.
We'll do targets, which is the one not the one after this, but certainly
the one he made. Yeah, that's the thing is that so Targets is definitely the movie he made before Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women. I'm fairly confident that Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women is literally just something that he took up for the paycheck because he had made Targets and he was having trouble finding a distributor for it. But let's just go ahead and do that. This will go up free. R.I.P. to Peter Bogdanovich. We're
coming back.
Another man's gone down. But yeah, we'll come back with a patron exclusive episode, and we'll be delving into targets.
And after that, we'll do.
Then it's Ghost Ship. Then we're going right back to Val Lewton. Yeah, sorry we kept you waiting, but look, we had to do it. It's like we have to remind people that the greatest directors of a generation were all connected to the same schlock master who not only was good at making schlock, but had an uncompromising eye for talent.
Yes.
Let's just say that. But I'll stop ranting. R.I.P. once again to Peter Bogdanovich. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again on another episode of Monster Craze Memoirs.
Mamie wouldn't go in the water. She was afraid of sharks, so she had her boyfriend standing. She actually slumped down into a little puddle.
Mm-hmm.
And her boyfriend was standing by with a baseball bat in case a shark came along. Anyway, it was fun. It was crazy.